Thank you, Maddie, and welcome everyone to Johnson Consulting Conversations. And today we have a very special guest who has dedicated his career to making funeral service workplaces safer for everyone. Mark Harrison is president of Certified Safety Training, the exclusive safety and compliance provider for major industry associations, including ICCFA, Selected Independent, and NFDA, along with other major state associations. He's got extensive experience with online education and digital training, and he has successfully launched safety and compliance services across funeral service, cemetery, monument, and veterinarian industries. Mark does hold a degree from Dickinson College as well as Montclair State University and has delivered educational seminars to every national associations and dozens of state associations. And his company, Certified Safety Training, is backed by certified safety professionals and has 30 years of funeral service compliance experience. And just this year, Certified Safety Training reached an incredible milestone. They trained their 100,000th funeral service worker. Mark, welcome to Johnson Consulting Conversations and congratulations on your recent milestone.
Thanks. Thank you, Lacey. I appreciate it. I should have recorded everything you just said. It was very impressive. And just for point of clarification, we've completed 100,000 trainings. So some people will take multiple trainings. But yeah, it's a huge milestone, and I'm excited to share our journey and what can be valuable to the attendees.
Even more impressive, and you're right, people do take those repeat training classes, and you've been working in the funeral service safety industry for nearly 30 years. What initially drew you to focus specifically on the funeral service profession?
Yeah, so our journey is it's kind of like a lot of funeral homes. Honestly, it's a generational handoff. So we had my uncle has been working with funeral homes for more than 30 years, and he is the backbone to the person that trained me. He's my mentor. He has a wealth of knowledge in the occupational safety and OSHA compliance space, and but he's based in Albany, New York, and getting a little longer in the tooth, and was thinking about how to hand this business off. And I saw an opportunity to take it online with my education and upbringing, and a couple other variables came into play, one being COVID. And so we went online before COVID, which was just fortuitous. I think we got very lucky. So we were able to reach people beyond New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. And now we're obviously nationwide. And I'm actually here expanding our business in Canada right now.
Excellent. And that's fascinating on how the family connection combined with innovative technology helped you to expand even further. Speaking of evolution, you've witnessed significant changes in workplace safety over the years. How has workplace safety evolved in funeral homes during your career?
I think people are just way more open to getting information in different ways that are more convenient for them. So, COVID and more COVID is what I say. So COVID was the genesis to putting us online in some ways, or at least finding success online. And I think funeral directors recognize now that you don't have to sit everybody down, stop your business for half a day or even a full day to conduct OSHA compliance. You can do it asynchronously on demand and then reinforce it in person with your culture. And then, the demographics are changing quite a bit too. So people are more open to learning on different mediums, having micro learnings or different ways to conduct knowledge transfer. And frankly, having things available 24/7 makes a big difference. It lets people focus on families. And our job is to serve people serving families.
COVID was certainly a game changer for digital adoption across many, many different industries. And with that massive shift to online training, you've now reached that incredible milestone in how many trainings that you have provided. What are the most common safety misconceptions you encounter when working with funeral homes?
Yeah, the biggest misconception that we face is the quote unquote, it won't happen to me, or this will never happen to my funeral home. I always say that's 100% true until it's not. We see this all the time where funeral homes come to us because they were not prepared for an injury or a safety inspection or an insurance audit. So that holds true time and time again. And then secondly, I would say that teaching old dogs, new tricks is never easy, and it might not always be what you think. Oftentimes, age and gender gaps in funeral homes are quite large, and I think they're continuing to expand. And this can lead to different learning styles, different communication styles, and if I'm being totally honest, awkward moments at time. So younger people are usually earlier adopters of technology, but that's not always great when you're dealing with a grief-stricken industry, and eye contact can be very powerful. So, I kind of like I mentioned before, I see our role as supporting funeral professionals and allowing them to do their jobs without having to focus on compliance all the time. And we help them check the box and stay safe, but not keep bogging them down with compliance.
And that mentality of it won't happen to me is so common across many different industries. But as you pointed out, it's true until it isn't. And I want to dig deeper into the specific risk that funeral service professionals do face. From your experience in working with funeral homes across the country, what are the three most critical safety hazards that funeral directors and embalmers face daily that they may not even realize?
Yeah, so it's a good question. It's not always what you think. Back injuries, slips, trips, and falls. Most people realize that. There's quite a bit of needle sticks in the industry too. But sometimes it's the actual activity. So removing a decedent has a really high rate of injury, and oftentimes higher than the actual embalming room or crematory, because people often don't think of a decedent's home as a high hazard area, but it definitely is. It's foreign to you. I have hopefully never been there. And then people are obviously different, and the weight of the average American in particular has increased so much that it's often a two-person or even three or four-person job to remove a decedent. You have to be very careful about how you're protecting your own body in doing so. So we have a very specific training on that. Another one that we get a lot of questions about is safe driving. And obviously, cell phones are ubiquitous at this point, but that doesn't mean that you should have one on when you're driving, or be looking at it when you're driving. And that goes beyond the workplace, but we just see that across the board.
That's really eye-opening about transfers. You bring up a lot of great points with that, and that they do carry such a high injury rate, when some may consider the embalming room to be the most dangerous area. I want to talk about the complexity of things that you're taking care of and helping funeral homes with, and that is OSHA compliance, which in itself can be quite complicated, especially with different state variations. 29 states do have their own state-specific OSHA plans. How does complicated compliance for funeral home owners, how does that work, and what they need for their employees, and what should they be looking out in their own particular state?
Yeah, it's a good question. I always tell people that nobody gets into this industry to wake up in the morning and say, I can't wait to do OSHA, right? So if you come at it from that angle and you think about it further, like, I can't wait to do OSHA in Cal OSHA format. It's like, okay, eventually this is just, you got to look to somewhere else to get expertise, because we tend to work backwards from California, which is the most extensive state based OSHA program. They've got three different programs that no other state has, like a injury illness prevention program, a heat illness program. There's violence prevention. There's quite a bit there. And California is kind of obvious from a regulatory environment, but there's other states that you might not always think of, like Alaska, Indiana, Iowa, Kentucky, Maine. I'm looking at a list right now: South Carolina, Tennessee, Utah, and Wyoming. They all have very specific state plans, and many of those are generated from industries that are high hazard industries in their states. But OSHA doesn't come into this and say, we're just going to focus on one industry. They look at the hazards across states and across the workplace, and then apply those hazards to any industry. So if it's West Virginia and coal mining, there might be some relevant respiratory protection that needs to happen in the funeral service industry as a result. So hopefully I'm showing you how complicated it can be, but that there is logic behind there being 29 OSHA approved state plans.
That's a great point made about unexpected states. I'm glad you brought up West Virginia as an example for us to fully understand of what it means when states have their own plans. As the industry evolves, we're seeing more and more funeral homes adding different cremation services, which brings on a whole different set of challenges. With the rise of those cremation services, what unique safety challenges do crematories present that maybe funeral homes may not be prepared for?
Yeah, so I think in light of kind of recognizing the regulatory hurdles of each state, we also should recognize that the government moves slower than the private sector. So as cremation is rising quickly, many of the regulations that impact cremation are not moving as quickly or as customized to the amount of crematories that are being built or used across the country. So there are some regulations that will always apply, like confined spaces, heat illness prevention, silica safety. These are all standards that often come from places like the construction industry, but also apply to any retort machine or crematory. But there are also ones that I think are frankly more important and more relevant, like fire safety, hazard communication, chemical safety, and then obviously wearing the correct PPE, which is very important.
So the construction industry, those regulations are crossing over into, cremation is something that funeral directors may not anticipate. But something else that we need to consider is the timing of training, and that's another critical factor. It is often overlooked. You have emphasized in some of the work that you've done in the past with JCG that OSHA training must happen at the time of the initial assignment. Why is timing so critical, and what mistakes do you see funeral homes making with new employee training?
Yeah, so timing is essential for two reasons. One is that new employees don't always know what they don't know, so you need to train them on safety, company culture, your standard operating procedures. You can always reinforce this through professional development. And honestly, getting somebody trained when they initially sign up is usually the best point because they're the most open-minded, right? That's really important. And then secondly, from a regulatory standpoint, OSHA requires that. We have clients that don't even issue a paycheck until an employee has been trained in their safety and OSHA compliance. Or signing their employee handbook or being trained on other company policies. So many times an employee has to do those things before they even enter a prep room or crematory. And then finally, I would just, as a kind of a distant third point, but important one, it's about culture and showing somebody when they join your organization that safety matters is showing that you care about them, you want to retain them, you want to protect them in the workplace.
I love that approach of not issuing the paycheck until compliance is complete. It really sends a message about priorities. I know in the past that you've recommended assigning a safety supervisor as a foundational step. For smaller funeral homes that have a limited staff, how can they realistically implement that role without overwhelming existing employees?
Yeah, so I like sports analogies. So kind of starring in your role is a phrase you hear a lot in different sports, and recognizing that safety supervisor, I'm putting this in quotes and as I'm saying it, there's a lot of wiggle room in what that title could mean, but everybody at a small funeral home wears multiple hats. So this is kind of an added hat to the hat rack, but it's an important one, and it's really somebody who understands what needs to be done on a day-to-day basis, and it can act as an emergency contact and answer any questions that their colleagues might have. In our model, because we work with a ton of small funeral homes, is to just be there as a support person supporting that quote unquote safety supervisor so that they have questions that they can't answer, our tools or our team can answer them. And then to provide all the resources on demand so that they can direct an employee right to it if they have a question.
The flexibility in that safety supervisor role makes it much more achievable for a smaller operation. I'd say a funeral home owner is looking for someone that may be similar to Dwight Schrute on The Office to serve as a safety supervisor, perhaps, or someone with that same sense of urgency, maybe. But I know documentation and record keeping seems to be central themes in your compliance approach. Can you walk us through what records funeral homes absolutely must keep and how long they need to retain them?
Yeah, it's kind of daunting actually, because a lot of this relates to health, which is, there are obviously HIPAA guidelines there too, but any sort of medical or chemical exposure, you need to keep a record of that for up to 30 years, which is wild. But that, if you're thinking about somebody working in their 20s or 30s, getting to retirement, that's basically their career. You need to maintain that record. Same with any sort of safety data sheets or chemical inventories. Bloodborne pathogen training in particular, you need to keep that for 3 years for similar reasons. And there's a number of other things, cremation documentation, vital records, all these other things are not necessarily OSHA related, but you should have a really robust record keeping system. And candidly, it should probably be online, because we've definitely had funeral homes that have dealt with fires and floods, or a disgruntled employee trying to cause issues. So having a digital, cloud-based backup can be really beneficial.
Those retention periods are quite extensive, and 30 years certainly emphasizes the long-term responsibility. Technology has played a huge role in how you deliver training and managing these records, and you do offer app-based training and online compliance tools. How has technology changed safety training in the funeral business, and what advantages does the digital training offer over the traditional methods? And just as you mentioned earlier, not spending an entire day away from funerals and families to complete that training.
Yeah, yeah. I'm honestly of two minds with it. I mean, it's made it so much more accessible, but it's also harder to connect with people. If that makes sense. And Lacey, you're particularly good at this. I think you're getting through the screen to me, which is awesome. But technology has changed a great deal, and our compliance app, we're able to train a lot more people than we were in person. We used to go around with a clipboard and do all that, right? And I'd go and speak at occasional events at state or national associations, which I still do. But now, literally, as we're talking, we're getting trainings done and training people in the industry, which is really cool. I mean, I think we just have a lot more accessibility, and frankly, it's more affordable. If you take out the friction of travel and hotels and logistics and scheduling and stopping the business from working, it's just way more accessible. So, and then all those record keeping. So the other obviously benefit is that all of the records and data, we're able to see industry trends across the industry and across markets that we wouldn't have been able to see with in-person training. We just have a lot more data to work with, and that can impact insurance premiums too in those negotiations.
I know that you have developed custom solutions for industry associations, which do require significant customization. And on behalf of everyone at JCG, we appreciate that customization, exactly what we do for our clients. We know that every association has different needs. Every funeral home client has different needs. And you've been able to do that for NFDA, ICCFA, and selected independent. How do you customize safety programs for different types of funeral home operations, from the small family-owned funeral homes to large corporate-owned funeral establishments?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think that, yeah, that's why we're partners, right, with you folks. I think we understand the industry very well and the needs of the industry at different levels. And I also think it's worth pointing out this is an overlooked industry, right? This is often an industry where there aren't as many custom materials or trainings, or there's not that much attention paid to it. So our enterprise system comes with enterprise level reporting, tiered access, and reporting across thousands of employees and hundreds of locations. And we can also design custom training based on employee handbooks, SOPs, and other policies. And then our smaller organizations have the same level of service, but the only difference is that they don't have the same amount of data to crunch. So their reporting is a little bit different. They might not have an employee handbook or standard operating procedure that they want to turn into a training, which we do for our enterprise clients. But in partnering with the NFDA and ICCFA and Selected, we also have pretty responsive trainings to their member needs. So if we get a question from Selected about how to create something for an independently owned funeral home, we go and do that. And that can be a specific learning track that we build too.
Customization is definitely time consuming, but worth the investment in being able to do that for funeral home clients across the country, and while maintaining service quality that you do at the high standard is certainly impressive. I want to shift our focus to when safety protocols are not followed and that the consequences can be severe. What's the most expensive OSHA violation or safety incident that you have seen at a funeral home that could have been prevented?
Yeah. So I always feel like this should be the first question in everyone's mind, but we have to save it to the middle or the end because otherwise people might say, okay, I
It's
know what
true.
I need to do one way or the other. We've seen a few instances where the fines have reached the maximum OSHA penalty of $161,000. It's a little more than that actually, but they are rare, and you have to really tell OSHA to go pound sand, right? Or be doing something so egregious that they continue to knock on your door. And typically this comes after an employee complaint or a community complaint. Again, if something so egregious that OSHA is forced to place the maximum fine on the funeral home. Uh, the reality is that if something like this happens, there are other organizations that can be involved, like the EPA, the Department of Health. And usually what we see, I don't know if this was part of your question or not, but when an OSHA fine breaks six figures and other agencies get involved and a funeral home realizes that they're looking at many, many months of being shut down anyway before they can come back online from a regulatory standpoint, they shut down. I mean, it doesn't make sense at that point to continue operating the business because the community fallout alone is daunting enough, let alone insurance premiums and other headaches.
That is sobering that when fines reach six figures, the funeral home does close, and it really hits the importance of the stakes that are involved at that point. So let's talk about the highest risk areas in funeral service. When it comes to embalming room safety, specifically, what are the non-negotiable safety protocols that every embalmer should follow, regardless of their experience level?
Yeah, so formaldehyde is a big one in this industry, and the EPA is obviously conducting a study. Yeah, the NFDA is taking the lead on that as well. And um, inhaling formaldehyde is a major hazard. Ensuring there's proper ventilation with the correct airflow is critical. Specifically, ensuring that the hazardous air gets out of the breathing zone as quickly as possible. And the same with the embalming machine; it should be near an outtake vent. So formaldehyde is a bit of a given. I've had some people say that there's not as much formaldehyde in this industry as other industries, which may be true, but the inhalation risk of inhaling formaldehyde is very high in this industry. PPE also gets a lot of attention, specifically gloves and respirators. They're very important. Most important is the employer needs to supply these things at all time, particularly if you have a mandatory respiratory protection program. You can opt out to having a voluntary one, but you have to have the right paperwork in place for that. I'm happy to answer any questions on that loophole if anyone's interested. And then another tip we often offer is getting everything out and in place before exposing the decedent's blood. So bloodborne pathogens in particular. It's very important because you don't want to have cross-contamination in the prep room. There's obviously blood, but there's other potentially infectious materials that OSHA looks for too. So make sure you have a good operating procedure in the prep room where you know that your tools are out and you don't have to go back in and cross-contaminate.
Preparation is key, and to have everything ready before the exposure is such practical advice. When incidences do occur, proper handling is crucial. How do funeral homes handle incident investigations and reporting, or how should they?
Yeah, so it all depends on the incident. So all employers, including those partially exempt by any reason or company size or industry classification, must report to OSHA any workplace incident, particularly if it results in a fatality or an inpatient hospitalization, amputation, or loss of an eye. So some of that's from memory, some of that is a quote I have here on my screen directly from OSHA. But I think what's important to take away from this is that a fatality, inpatient hospitalization, amputation, loss of eye are really extreme. OSHA's going to want to hear about that. There are exemptions in this industry, which are really interesting. I don't know what lobbyists they had 30 years ago to put these in place, but less than serious injuries don't always need to be reported. Anyone can ask us about those. Needle sticks come to mind, because making sure you're doing things the right way, but not overdoing it, is also important. You don't need to report everything. Just make sure you know what you need to report.
Understanding those reporting thresholds is important and critical for compliance. I am interested in digging a little bit deeper into those differences between incidences that must be reported to OSHA versus those that can be handled internally. Can you shed some more light on those?
Yeah, so I always look at it like, OSHA doesn't work on commission. There's not a gotcha operation. They're there to make sure the workplace is safer than it was, frankly, 30, 40, 50 years ago. So a fatality, an in-person hospitalization, amputation, loss of eye, those look bad on everyone, right? There's no way to say, oh, that wasn't that bad. That's all really bad. A needle stick, a slip, trip, and fall, back injury. This industry is largely exempt from having to report those things, which is good. Um, but there are certain elements like the insurance claims that come into play, and there are other industries that aren't too dissimilar from these that have to report those things because OSHA does capture that data and then change regulatory standards based on what the incidents might be.
So looking ahead to the future and evolution of the funeral business as it continues to evolve, what new safety challenges do you anticipate for funeral service?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting time. I think Ozempic being out there is pretty wild. Like we could see, if this becomes more ubiquitous, we could see people losing weight across the board, which I think would be probably a very good thing. But right now, and for the foreseeable future, we're going to be bearing heavy loads. There are lots of people that are very heavy and they have to be moved and transfers, and safe lifting is really important. I would, especially as as we all get further into our careers, our backs become less nimble. So making sure you understand the proper way to lift is very important. Or even somebody who's newer and might think they have superhuman strength. We're also seeing a greater increase in greener disposition. Aquamation is there. Green burial presents its own challenges, and aquamation in particular utilizes chemicals that are meant to break down human tissue. So that's something everyone should be aware of. If that stuff gets on your skin, it's not ideal. And then even green burial at large, not using non-mechanical lifting and lowering techniques can be pretty dicey. With the human body can be pretty frail. So you've got to think about having the right standard operating procedures across the board for those three trends.
Climate change and new disposition methods are certainly creating new safety considerations that funeral homes do need to be aware of. Are there new regulations or industry changes that funeral directors should be preparing for?
Yeah, and this actually relates to the last question you had too. I think with the world, I mean, this is the right time to say it, especially on the East Coast. With the world getting hotter, operating a retort machine or working within a crematory is dangerous. You have to be careful about how hot it can be with PPE on. Operating outside in a cemetery, right? There are specific protocols you need to have in place to make sure that your employees aren't dealing with heat exhaustion. And there's heat illness prevention is something that OSHA has been talking about for a number of years, and California has implemented. So make sure your outdoor workers and your crematory operators are working in comfortable environments or taking breaks if it is excessively hot.
So heat illness prevention is something many funeral directors may not have on their radar. Now, for our audience members who may be feeling a little bit overwhelmed by all of this information and what's in the pipeline and what should be on everyone's radar, let us talk about practical next steps for those funeral home owners listening who might be overwhelmed by safety compliance. What is your advice for taking that first step?
Yeah, the first step is a baby step. If you need advice, just reach out to us directly. We'll steer you in the right direction. We have lots of free downloadable checklists if you want to just get something done on your own and kind of get a read on where you're at. But yeah, our process is pretty simple. If you do sign up with us, you fill out a questionnaire, we customize a manual and ship it to you. We onboard you and your team into our app where there's no login necessary to take the trainings. And then we handle all of your electronic safety data sheets through a series of posters and QR codes. So it's really simple and it doesn't have to be complicated. Even if you're doing it internally, I think our checklists are a great place to start.
It's great that you do offer those complimentary resources and checklists to get started. For those that are doing minimal safety training at this point, what is your advice for them to take it to the next level?
Yeah. Um, one of the things when I present in person or even on Zoom, I always say to let people star in their role, which I mentioned earlier. So if you have somebody that spends a lot of time in the prep room or crematory, make sure that they own that space and that they think about safety, not just for themselves, but anyone who enters it. I think that's a great start. Like this is your responsibility to make sure that this space is safe. And then we have some, like those checklists I mentioned, there are other tools out there just to get them started and feel empowered to own that part of the business. I think that's really important.
Thank you for that. And I want to check in with Maddie to see what questions have been dropped into the chat box.
Absolutely. Also, a question that is always popular that has been posed. This is being recorded, and we will be sending it out to all registrants along with Lacey's follow-up blog, which will include just a rundown of everything that's been covered, as well as we can include the links to those checklists. And also, other questions that we have here. Kenny asks, percentage-wise, what is the approximate rate of increase of cremation versus direct burial? Also, what is the percentage of the increase of cremation over, say, the past 3 to 5 years?
Oh man, a lot. The NFDA, CANA, and ICCFA, I think all have great data on this. I use some of their graphs in my presentations, but I know that we're looking at close to 80% cremation in the next 5 or 10 years, I think.
Absolutely. And it looks like those are our two primary questions that we had at this time. If anyone else would like to pose one, please drop it into the Q&A area now.
Mark, I have one more question for you. In your career profile, it mentions that you enjoy binge watching TV shows. So when you are not revolutionizing safety training, what's been your favorite binge-worthy TV show this year?
Yeah, thanks. I think we as a team are big office people, and you had already mentioned Dwight Schrute. And so to me, like I'll remember a lot of the things I said today, but the fact that you brought up Dwight Schrute in this, and I have the visual of him being the safety supervisor, that I would probably say The Office, because you can turn on anytime, start anywhere, and it's just magic. So
That's true. Dwight Schrute, very special character on The Office. So I will probably associate Dwight Schrute with this virtual event from here on out. But Mark, this has been incredibly informative, and your insights into funeral home workplace safety, from practical day-to-day challenges to emerging trends like the heat illness prevention and green disposition methods, does provide valuable guidance for funeral professionals at every level. For listeners who want to learn more about certified safety training and access those downloadable checklists and resources Mark mentioned, how can they reach you, Mark?
they can reach our company email, help@certifiedsafetytraining.org, or just go to our website, certifiedsafetytraining.org.
Well, thank you so much, Mark, for joining us today for Johnson Consulting Conversations, and your dedication to making funeral service workplaces safer is truly making a difference. I want to thank our audience for tuning in, and of course, thank Maddie for all of her hard work behind the scenes. We'll see you next time on Johnson Consulting Conversations on July 16th at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, where we will be discussing SMS aftercare programming. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Maddie. Thanks for everybody for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.